5 minutes ago, the palace fell completely silent. The king, the very heart of the entire monarchy, suddenly stopped breathing inside his private chamber. No alarm bells, no final words, only the sound of panicked breaths from those nearest to him, and the bewildered eyes of guards standing in the hallway. In that moment, the whole royal family seemed frozen in time. Have you ever imagined what it's like to witness the border between life and death right before your eyes? This information was confirmed by the king's own medical team and his most trusted guards. They were the first people at the scene, the ones who personally tried to revive him in those final minutes. According to exclusive sources from inside the palace, every detail comes from official accounts, not rumors. That makes this incident even heavier, because for the first time, the royal household faces a crisis that could reshape the entire future of the monarchy. The first moments were pure chaos. Before anyone dared to cry, each member of the royal family had to face their deepest fear. Not only the fear of loss, but of power, titles, and the fragile order of succession. The palace was immediately sealed off. The king's doctors were summoned urgently, and internal phone calls rang nonstop across the royal residence. Everyone understood one thing: a single wrong word could shake the empire. Amid that tense atmosphere, a question arose. Has the king's true condition been hidden all this time? Were those smiling public appearances just a calm facade hiding the storm within? What do you think? Is the palace concealing the truth about the king's illness? Press 1 if you believe they are. Press 2 if you think it was simply a sudden medical emergency. Inside the king's private chamber, dim light filtered through the thick curtains, casting a pale glow on his lifeless face. The time was 5:47 p.m. No one knows exactly what happened in that first instant, only the sound of a crystal glass falling to the floor, a pen cap rolling softly across the wooden desk, and then an eerie silence filling the room. When the guards entered, the king was slumped in his chair, his hand resting on a half-signed document. No breathing, no movement. The air felt heavy, like all the oxygen had been pulled out. "Doctor!" The first shout pierced the silence. Two guards rushed into the corridor. One sprinted to the medical unit. The other made an emergency call to the palace medical team. In less than a minute, footsteps thundered across the marble floor. Radios crackled sharply. The door flew open. Three doctors burst in with emergency kits, oxygen tanks, and a defibrillator. "Check pulse and breathing," the chief doctor commanded. Movements were swift but trembling. "No pulse, no response." The young doctor's voice cracked. In that suffocating room, only the monotone of the monitor echoed, while the clock's second hand crawled as if mocking time itself. "Start CPR," the order rang out. One doctor pressed firmly on the king's chest, steady, strong, unyielding. Another adjusted the breathing tube and checked the oxygen line. Sweat drenched their foreheads, their white coats clinging to their skin. Charging for first shock. The defibrillator beeped. A flash of light. The king's body jolted. No reaction. Second shock. Higher voltage. Blinding light filled the room. The doctors checked his pulse and breathing. Guards made emergency calls. Every second became a fight between life and death. In the hallway, the queen stood frozen, clutching a white handkerchief tightly in her hand. She wasn't allowed to enter, but her eyes followed every movement inside. One attendant whispered, "His Majesty will be all right. Your Majesty." She nodded weakly, her voice trembling. "He's never been this weak before." Every small sound echoed clearly down the long corridor, where portraits of ancestors seemed to watch in silence. Medical equipment filled the room, the light blinding, yet every move was fast and precise. The lead doctor checked all the monitors again. The heartbeat line remained flat, a terrifying emptiness. "Increase oxygen. Keep pressing." The orders came fast. The third guard was already in direct contact with the Royal Medical Center, asking them to prepare the intensive care unit. By then, the clock read 5:52 p.m., 5 minutes, only 5, but it felt like eternity. the smell of antiseptic mixed with the metallic scent of medical tools. Each electric shock carried both hope and fear. "Don't lose the rhythm, keep going," the head doctor shouted. Then suddenly a faint beep broke through. A weak pulse appeared on the monitor. Everyone froze. "There's a signal. His heartbeat is back." The voice cracked, caught between relief and dread. A nurse burst into tears, quickly wiping them away to keep working. The chief physician signaled to stabilize the blood pressure. "Start the IV. Monitor closely." The king remained unconscious, his face pale, but his chest began to rise again. "Put him on the stretcher. Prepare to move him to the special medical chamber." The order rang out, sharp and commanding. The doors opened, light from the corridor spilling into the room, brushing across the queen's face. She stepped forward, eyes glistening with tears. "Is he still alive?" she asked softly. "For now, yes, Your Majesty." The doctor replied, a sentence that was both salvation and sentence at once. Along the corridor, guards lined up, bowing their heads as the medical team passed by. The sound of the stretcher wheels echoed heavily across the marble floor. The entire palace was placed under emergency lockdown, security doubled, media channels cut off, no information allowed to leave the grounds. Everyone understood. Even the smallest rumor could set off panic across the nation. Inside the palace's central medical suite, the doctors worked quickly, machines beeping in rhythm. Blood pressure is temporarily stable. The heartbeat is weak but steady. One doctor reported, "Keep absolute silence. No one enters except the treatment team." The queen sat outside the chamber, clutching her rosary tightly. Wind hissed through the crack of the old door, carrying the chill of late afternoon. One attendant bent down and whispered, "Your Majesty, the Prince of Wales is on his way back." She nodded faintly, her gaze still fixed on the door, behind which the man she had shared half a century with now lay motionless, surrounded by cold machinery. Time slowed. Every minute felt like a test of faith. Inside, the chief physician scribbled down each number, each reading. No one spoke. Only the hum of the monitors filled the air. A faint, wavering pulse line glowed on the screen, fragile proof of life. "We can't say anything yet," the doctor murmured, "but he's still fighting." The entire palace seemed to hold its breath. Every room, every hallway pulsed with the same rhythm. The rhythm of waiting. From the guards outside to the kitchen servants below, everyone knew that what was happening behind that door could decide the fate of the monarchy itself. And as the doctors worked tirelessly inside, the first ripples of worry spread among the rest of the royal family. Bits of information leaked through hushed calls, nervous glances, hurried footsteps along ancient corridors. A storm was forming, however, not only within that medical chamber, but in the very heart of the kingdom. News of the king's condition spread through the palace like a cold electric current. By the time Princess Anne's car arrived at the gates, the sky had already darkened. The wind swept through the old trees, whispering heavy sounds of dread. Inside the grand hall, William was already there, seated on a velvet bench, elbows on his knees, hands covering his face, eyes fixed on the cold marble floor. No one spoke. Only the ticking clock on the wall counted down each second, every one of them a battle for the king's breath. The door opened. Princess Anne entered, her face tense yet composed. She glanced around, saw William bowed over, his hands trembling slightly. She walked to him, placed a hand on his shoulder, and said quietly but firmly, "We must stay calm. Every minute counts." Her words carried through the room like a steady light, soft but unshakable, and everyone fell silent. A medic stepped out from the inner corridor, bowing slightly. "The doctors are doing everything they can." "Your Royal Highness." Anne nodded, her eyes fixed on the closed door ahead. Beyond it lay her father, the man who had carried the weight of a nation for decades, now lying still amid the cold hum of machines. William lifted his head, eyes red. "I spoke with his personal doctor," he said quietly, voice breaking. They still can't say for certain. Anne nodded again, stepping toward the window. The outside light reflected faintly against the glass, mirroring the two of them. Two children, two faces bound by the same fear, both struggling to hold themselves steady in the storm of uncertainty. A few advisors entered, carrying phones and folders. The media has started asking questions, one of them whispered. We should release a statement soon, before rumors spread. William looked up, his tone low but firm. Not yet. Not a single word until we know exactly what's happening. The words were resolute, but his hand, tightening on his knee, betrayed the tension he was trying so hard to hide. Outside, the Queen remained in the medical chamber. The door was half closed, white light spilling faintly into the hallway. Dim, but harsh. A nurse walked past carrying a tray of instruments, her eyes red from tears. Everyone understood that the silence now was far more terrifying than any alarm could ever be. In a small room down the corridor, William's children were being watched over by their nanny. They sat close together on a couch, staring at the television with the sound muted. Only the image of ambulances flashing outside the palace gates. Where's Daddy? The little girl whispered. The nanny took their hands, forcing a smile. He's helping Grandpa. Sweetheart, don't worry. But her own eyes shimmered with tears. The children didn't understand what was happening, only that their grandfather was fighting the greatest battle of his life. William moved to the tall window, staring into the dark courtyard. Yellow lamps glimmered on the wet stones, the shadows of guards moving slowly across the gravel. A hollow feeling spread through him, part fear, part helplessness. One half of him was still a son praying for a miracle. The other already knew that if the worst came, he would not have time to grieve. The crown would fall on his shoulders in an instant. Princess Anne sat at a nearby desk, opening a small notebook, writing down what must be done. Contact the Prime Minister. Check the advisors list. Review the royal schedule. Each line she wrote was a way to stop herself from falling apart. She had lived her whole life staying calm while the world around her lost control. Yet tonight her hands trembled. Down the hall, a security officer approached William and whispered. He nodded, then turned to Anne. The doctors want to speak with us in a few minutes. They walked side by side, silent, their footsteps heavy on the stone floor. They stopped before the great door, bright light seeping through the crack. No one dared to open it first. In that moment, Annie whispered, Father always said that when facing fear, the most important thing is to stand firm. William looked at her, his eyes wet but steady. I just hope I can, he said softly. The door opened. The chief physician stepped out, removing his mask. Exhaustion etched across his face. His Majesty is temporarily stable, he said, but his condition is still critical. A breath escaped William. Anne closed her eyes briefly, then reopened them with resolve. Keep close watch. Whatever you need, tell me immediately. The doctor nodded and disappeared back into the room. The door closed once more, and silence returned. The Queen still hadn't come out. In the main hall, candles were lit. The flickering flames danced across old portraits lining the walls. William sat down, staring at a photo of the king taken during the last royal ceremony. Radiant face, confident smile, eyes bright with life. He realized then that the image had been a mask, a wall hiding years of exhaustion and pain that only the family had seen. Anne stood in behind him, her voice low. It's strange, isn't it? We spend our lives learning to look calm, only to realize we were just hiding our fear. William said nothing, only nodded. Outside, rain began to fall, gentle drops tapping against the window frame. The light in the room dimmed, leaving the image of two children grown, quiet, waiting, inside a palace once filled with laughter, now echoing only with sighs. And as they waited for news from the doctors, another feeling crept into the air. The sense that grief was not shared equally. Because within the same palace, while some were truly afraid, others had already begun calculating the future. The air inside the royal medical chamber felt thick, as if even oxygen held its breath with every fragile beat of the king's heart. The monitor beeped steadily. Beep, beep. Each sound a fragile thread of hope. In the circle of doctors and nurses, Camilla still stood there. She hadn't moved since the moment the king was brought in, her arms folded, shoulders trembling, eyes glistening, face streaked with tears. Yet her gaze, cold, deep, deliberate, gave the room an uneasy chill. No one said a word, but everyone felt it. There was something about her sorrow that didn't seem real. A nurse offered her a tissue. Camilla nodded gently, wiping her tears slowly, carefully, as if afraid to disturb the picture being watched. Every motion was perfect, precise, almost rehearsed. When a doctor sighed, she bowed her head. When another nurse cried softly, she placed her hand over her heart, lips trembling. But amid genuine panic, her reaction looked like a performance practiced to perfection. Camilla wiped her tears, but her eyes swept across the room, calculating. Were those tears real, or just a performance for the camera? No one dared meet her gaze, yet everyone sensed the difference. Real grief is rough, raw, unpredictable. Hers was rounded, timed, and measured just enough to invite pity. When the doctors announced the king's heartbeat had stabilized for now, William entered, worry still etched across his face. Camilla immediately stepped forward, her voice trembling. They've saved him, you see? It sounded emotional, but there was something too sharp and too deliberate, as if she wanted someone else to hear. William only nodded, silent. Her eyes shimmered, but she didn't look directly at him. Her gaze drifted over the doctors, the nurses, and the queen, as if she were studying every reaction. Princess Anne stood across the room, watching quietly. She said nothing, but her look was colder than any accusation. She had spent her life reading people, and she knew well the difference between compassion and the imitation of it. When Camilla stepped to the bedside, gently taking the king's hand, she leaned forward, voice trembling. My love, please wake up. The words hung in the air, but no one believed them. Later, one of the royal nurses who had served the family for years would recall, at that moment I saw her reflection in the mirror, no tears at all, just a blank, cold stare, like she was calculating something. While William and Anne bowed their heads in prayer, Camilla stood upright, adjusted her hair, and glanced around the room. Perhaps unintentionally, or perhaps not, her gaze lingered on the curtain at the foot of the king's bed, where the royal crest and medical file hung. It lasted only a second, but it was enough to make any sharp observer wonder, was she worrying for her husband, or already thinking beyond him? Observers inside the royal household all noticed the same thing. True grief cannot be performed. A few attendants whispered in the hallway. One murmured, if I didn't know she once did amateur theater at charity events, I might have believed she was truly heartbroken. The other replied, maybe she's simply aware the security cameras in the room are still recording. That line silenced them both. In the palace, sometimes a single glance can stir an entire storm of rumor. William remained by the bedside, his hands clenched tight. Camilla moved closer, placing a hand on his shoulder. You should rest a bit, she said softly. I'll stay with him. The words sounded maternal, but they sent a chill down his spine. There was something in her tone, a tenderness too measured, a calm that felt more like control. William stood up, replying quietly, thank you, but I'll stay. Princess Anne, who had watched the entire exchange, turned to the secretary nearby and said in a low voice, note the time and His Majesty's condition. It was her subtle way of cutting through the artificial air that had filled the room. Anne knew well that sometimes silence, the silence of sincerity, is the strongest form of defiance. Camilla sat down beside the bed, bowing her head toward the king. Her hand rested gently on the blanket, but her grip tightened slightly, as if claiming possession. More tears fell, glimmering in the sterile light, but this time, No one believed them. In that room, the exhaustion, fear, and quiet despair of the others made her grief feel hollow, exaggerated, even theatrical. A doctor checked his watch and sighed. His Majesty needs complete rest. Camilla immediately responded, so quickly that everyone turned toward her. I'll make sure of that. Her tone was firm, steady, almost rehearsed, as though she'd been waiting for that line. Anne glanced at her without a word, lowering her eyes, though an uneasy feeling had already risen in her chest. Outside the room, messages began circulating through the palace network. Camilla is in charge inside the medical suite, and she looks frighteningly calm. Could this be how she's securing her position? No one said it out loud, but the whispers were already weaving through the walls. Inside, Camilla stood, took a deep breath, and looked around. We must all stay strong for the king, she declared. Her voice echoed through the room, sounding like a rallying call. But when she turned away, the reflection of light in her eyes revealed not sorrow, but the sharp awareness of someone in command. Anne watched her go, then quietly closed her eyes and thought to herself, sometimes tears are just the curtain that hides power. The air remained heavy, but something had changed. The fear that filled the room had turned into caution, and not just for the king's fragile health, but for the person standing beside his bed. The medical chamber glowed under pale light. The monitor beeped steadily, though the wavering heart rate line made every chest tighten. The chief physician leaned close to the bed, eyes fixed on the screen, sweat running down his temple. A nurse held the king's hand, counting his pulse while whispering a prayer. Nearby, William and Anne stood motionless, barely breathing. Time seemed suspended, every second dragging like lead. Then suddenly, a faint sound, soft but unmistakable, cut through the silence. The heartbeat line began to rise slowly, more even, more stable. A doctor rechecked the readings, his eyes lighting up. 50, 60, 70. It's stabilizing, he called out, voice trembling. The entire room froze, waiting for the final confirmation. The chief physician removed his glasses, looked around, and spoke clearly, each word measured. Heartbeat stable. His Majesty is out of immediate danger. For a moment, the room seemed to glow brighter. No one spoke. Then came a wave of released breath. Gasps. Yeah, relief. A nurse broke down crying. Another covered her mouth, tears spilling down. William stepped back, burying his face in his hands, as if he couldn't believe what he'd just heard. Anne sank into a chair, eyes closed, lips trembling with emotion. The doctor announced, heartbeat stable, His Majesty is out of danger. The room held its breath, then exhaled in one soft, trembling sigh of relief. Camilla still stood beside the bed, but this time no one was looking at her anymore. All eyes were on the king, the man who had just pulled breath back from the hands of death. The steady beeping of the monitor sounded like the most fragile, most precious melody on earth. William stepped closer, placing his hand gently over his father's. Real warmth, faint, but undeniable. He bowed his head, and tears fell onto that old, weathered hand. Father, you're still here, he whispered. Across the bed, Queen Camilla held his other hand, eyes glistening, lips trembling without sound. Behind them, Anne stood at a respectful distance, silent but present. Her eyes met William's for a fleeting moment. No words, just a shared truth. We still have time. The doctors adjusted the machines, checked oxygen levels, recorded every detail. One of them exhaled in disbelief. I've never seen anyone recover this quickly after such a long cardiac arrest. Another nodded. He's as strong as ever. Their voices carried a mix of awe and respect. News spread instantly down the corridor. A nurse whispered to the guard at the door, His Majesty is out of danger. The message moved like a spark in darkness. Within 5 minutes, the entire palace felt transformed. Servants exchanged relieved smiles. Soldiers at the gate clasped hands. Communications staff sighed in unison. A wave of relief flowed from the highest chamber to the farthest hallway. Outside the palace gates, hundreds of people had waited through the freezing night. When the news was confirmed, the crowd erupted. A woman broke into tears, covering her face. An old man lifted the king's photograph high and shouted, "He's alive! God bless England!" Cheers and sobs mixed in the air. News channels began running the headline, "The king out of danger, palace confirms his condition is stable." Inside, William sank into the chair beside the bed, still holding his father's hand. He said nothing, just watched the slow, steady rhythm of his breathing. In that moment, he felt as if life had handed him back its rarest gift. Time, no longer just a frightened son. William felt a quiet surge of duty within. If this miracle had been granted, he thought, then it must not go to waste. Anne walked toward the window, gazing at the mist-covered gardens. She saw the first rays of dawn breaking through the oaks. The sky softened, and so did her heart, after a night stretched thin by fear. She whispered, "Thank God, we still have our brother." The doctors kept working, but the energy had changed. No more frantic voices, no sharp orders, only careful, reverent movements, as if handling something sacred. A nurse murmured, "Miracles do exist." Another replied softly, "Not only in medicine, but in the will to live." Reports were filed. In the palace's emergency meeting room, secretaries noted, "The king's condition is stable. He requires complete rest. No visitors for 48 hours." The message was sent to the media. Short statement, no commentary. Yet everyone knew a wave of joyful headlines was already forming beyond the palace gates. On social media, millions shared Buckingham Palace's announcement. Comments flooded in. "Thank you for still being here. England still has its heart. A modern-day miracle." Pictures of the smiling king from past engagements resurfaced, softening the mood across the nation. In the quiet chamber, William lifted his head and looked around. He saw Camilla sitting in the far corner, her face pale, her eyes still wet. But this time, he didn't focus on her. Every emotion in him was drawn toward his father, not the monarch, not the symbol, but the man, frail and human, lying in that bed. Princess Anne stood nearby, hands clasped. She said nothing, only nodded faintly when William looked her way. Between them, no words were needed, only a look that said everything. They both knew this moment would be carved into memory forever. The king's breathing grew steadier. Light shimmered on the royal crest above the wall, bathing the room in a gentle warmth. A doctor adjusted the blanket and stepped back, relief softening his face. In the corridor, servants carried trays of tea for the Queen and Princess Anne. No one drank. They only held the cups for warmth. A young soldier, upon hearing the news, quietly pulled a small photo from his pocket, one taken with the king during last year's parade. He looked at it for a long moment, then smiled. Across London, church bells began to ring. Not funeral bells, but bells of joy, deep, resonant, full of hope. The sound rolled through the city, mingling with the hum of early morning traffic, reminding everyone that life, after all, is stronger than fear. A communications aide entered the room softly. "Your Highness, the good news has spread. The whole country is praying for him." William replied quietly, "Let them rejoice. They deserve to believe again." And within that warmth, amid relief, exhaustion, and gratitude, a thin layer of silence still lingered. The kind of silence shared by those who understand that behind every miracle lies another test. As the morning sun spilled through the tall window, glinting on the polished floor, everyone in the room felt it. They had just crossed a fragile boundary between loss and hope. Outside, birds began to sing high above the trees, a triumphant hymn to life itself. That morning in London was unlike any other. The pale sun broke through a damp sky, casting a faint shimmer across the lake and the palace gardens. On the surface, the air seemed calm, but behind the old stone walls, a dynasty was shifting. King Charles remained in the recovery wing, watched over by rotating doctors. Yet within the palace's inner chambers, quiet meetings had already begun. Meetings about succession. No one said it aloud, but everyone understood one mistake, one wrong word, and the kingdom could descend into chaos. William stood by the window, holding a cup of tea gone cold. His gaze lingered on the distant garden, where the first roses of the season swayed gently in the wind. Every petal that fell reminded him of time, always moving faster than human decisions. Since his father had fallen ill, everything inside the palace had changed. More meetings, different glances, and even silence itself now carried weight. That morning, the royal private secretary knocked on his door. "Your Royal Highness, the Council of Advisors is ready. The meeting begins in 10 minutes. William set his cup down and drew a long breath. He knew this would not be an ordinary meeting. Today, he would be officially briefed on the initiation of preparations for his coronation, a process that could take months, even years, but would begin on this very day. The long corridor, carpeted in deep red, led to a bright conference room. Portraits of former monarchs lined the walls, their stern faces watching every step he took. When the great doors opened, William paused. For a moment, he heard his own heartbeat, steady, loud, mixing with the ticking of an antique clock. Then he stepped inside. William entered the room with a composed, serious look. The decisions made today would shape the destiny of the monarchy. Inside, advisors, secretaries, and the prime minister were already seated. Stacks of heavy folders covered the table. Ceremonial calendars were marked in red ink. No one spoke as he entered, but all rose to their feet. He was no longer simply the Prince of Wales. In their eyes, he was already the future king. The Archbishop of Canterbury began. "Your Royal Highness, the king is still recovering, but under constitutional guidance. Preparations for succession cannot be delayed. We must begin the coronation process to ensure the stability of the realm." William nodded. "I understand." The Prime Minister followed. "Your Royal Highness, the government will assist in every detail, but there are choices only you can make. Your oath, your symbols, your voice to the people. This era needs a different kind of monarch, one closer to the public, yet unshaken in royal dignity." He listened carefully, taking notes, though a quiet unease stirred within him. Every word in that room felt heavy with history. As the meeting stretched past 2 hours, William could feel the weight of a kingdom settling on his shoulders. No one could ever be truly prepared for that feeling. When it ended, the others stood, bowed, and left. William remained seated, staring at the folders before him. Between the lines about rituals, budgets, and logistics, he saw himself, a man slowly being stripped of the right to fear. That afternoon, he was taken to Westminster Abbey to review the ceremonial layout. The Abbey, more than 1,000 years old, had witnessed the coronations of dozens of English kings and queens. As he entered, he looked up at the high vaulted ceiling, its intricate carvings catching the light through stained glass. Red, blue, and gold spilled across the stone floor, like the bloodstream of history flowing beneath his feet. The master of ceremonies explained every detail: the throne's placement, the path of the procession, the anthem that would play when he entered. Every second, every motion had been calculated. But William stayed silent. He walked slowly toward the velvet-covered throne, running his hand along the carved edge of the wood. The chill of it spread through his skin. In that moment, he realized how close glory stands to loneliness. He knew that the coronation was not merely a ceremony, but it was a lifelong wait, with every detail carved into destiny. That night, back in his study, the family photographs were still neatly arranged. The first was of his father, King Charles, smiling gently, hand on William's shoulder during a long-ago picnic. The second was his mother, Princess Diana, her eyes bright and warm, still carrying that unshakable faith she had once given him. He looked at them for a long moment and whispered, "Mom, I wish you could see this day, but I know you're here, watching." Outside, rain tapped softly against the windows. William sat alone, opening a small notebook. Each line he wrote trembled, not from fear, but from the awareness that he was writing the opening chapter of a new era. He wrote, "This is not about inheriting a crown, it's about inheriting responsibility. Without trust, the crown means nothing." The next morning, the fitting for his ceremonial attire was held. Tailors arrived with robes, golden threaded gloves, and a mock crown. William stood before the mirror, trying on the robe, heavy, more than 10 kilograms, its weight pressing down on his shoulders. "It's made so that whoever wears it feels the burden of power," the tailor explained. He smiled faintly. "And perhaps," he said, "the loneliness that comes with it." Outside, Princess Anne watched quietly. In William, she no longer saw the uncertain boy he once was, but a man learning to step into destiny. When he turned, she simply nodded. No words. Her silent trust was enough to steady him. Camilla, however, was different. She kept her distance, her expression unreadable. She knew that once the coronation began, her place in the hierarchy would shift. Under a new reign, the spotlight would fall on William and Catherine. She sighed softly, turning the ring on her finger before leaving the room. That afternoon, William met privately with the Prime Minister. They sat face to face in a quiet chamber, the draft of his coronation speech between them. The Prime Minister began, "Your Majesty, the people need to hear something new, not just promises. They need to feel that this reign will be closer, more humane." William replied, "I understand, but closeness cannot mean weakness. A king must inspire trust, not pity." The conversation lasted nearly an hour. When it ended, the Prime Minister rose and bowed. "I believe you will succeed, Your Majesty. This country has waited far too long for such a moment." That night, William walked alone through the long corridors of the palace. Golden lamps cast a soft glow across the portraits of past monarchs, faces that seemed to peer into his thoughts. He stopped before the portrait of Queen Elizabeth II, his great-grandmother, whom he had always admired. "I don't know if I can do what you did," he said quietly, "but I will try to be worthy." The next day, the final meeting for the coronation schedule took place. Advisors presented the timeline, the oath, the procession, the speech, and official meetings with world leaders. Every detail had been checked 3 times. An elder advisor said gently, "Your Majesty, the crown will rest upon your head for just 3 minutes, but the eyes of the world will rest upon you for all 3. Remember, that moment will define your life." William said nothing. He didn't need to. He had known it all along, from the moment he was born. His entire life had been preparing him for those 3 minutes. When the meeting ended, everyone left, and he remained alone. Standing by the window, he looked out at the London sky. The gray clouds were slowly parting, letting through the faint light of a late afternoon sun. That light touched his face, weary but resolute. A short while later, Anne entered the room. She didn't speak. She simply placed an envelope on William's desk. It was a letter from King Charles, written before his illness worsened. William opened it. His father's handwriting was still firm, deliberate, unmistakable. "My son, the crown is never a reward. It is a duty. He who wears it must first learn to bow before his people, before they ever bow to him. If ever you find yourself in doubt, remember this: the strength of a king lies in compassion, not in the throne." William folded the letter carefully, his eyes glistening. He whispered, "I understand, Father." That evening, every light in the palace burned bright. Convoys of cars carried documents, garments, and ceremonial staff in and out of the gates. A new moment was approaching. William walked along the corridor, the sound of his footsteps steady and measured, blending with the clock striking 8. He no longer felt like the son seeking his father's protection, but the man about to protect an entire nation. At the entrance to the ceremonial chamber, he paused. An attendant handed him the final checklist. William glanced through it, then said quietly, "Tomorrow, let everything unfold as it should. Don't overdo anything. Keep it honest, simple, and true to the spirit of our time. The secretary nodded. He looked up at the ceiling, where crystal lights scattered into 1,000 reflections. In his heart, he could almost hear the voices of the past, his father, his mother, the monarchs whose names were now history. Each voice whispered the same reminder: never let power strip away the humanity within you. The king had survived the crisis. The royal household was, for now, stable. And William had begun stepping into the role of heir. After days of tension, the palace seemed to breathe again. Yet in every glance, every quiet conversation, there lingered something unresolved. Outwardly, everything appeared to be in order. Doctors continued to watch over the king, royal duties resumed, and William's presence in meetings grew, a living symbol of continuity. But beneath that calm, new challenges were quietly forming. This story doesn't end with a miracle of survival. It only opens into a new chapter, where life, death, burden, and duty intertwine in a dance no one can predict. The king's recovery is a blessing for the nation, but it is also a test of loyalty, of faith, and of the fragile bonds behind closed doors. The story of life, burden, and responsibility continues. Do you believe William has the strength to carry an entire dynasty on his shoulders? Stay with us for what comes next, where the light of the crown may reveal the deepest secrets of the royal bloodline.